Hello, Mayor and Council. Matt Weatherly from Public Sector Personnel Consultants. Pleasure to be with you again. Last time that we visited was right before the holidays. We were kicking off a citywide classification and compensation study. So I have a report of findings and recommendations in the executive summary, format here, so that we can talk about what we did, what we found, what we're recommending, and then I'll turn it over for any questions as well as anything that the staff might like to add. You'll recall that we invited all employees to review their job description. So staff completed job questionnaires that allows us to update job descriptions where necessary, update job titles as appropriate. So reviewing, how we choose to use titles like supervisor, technician, specialist, manager. We did have an opportunity for three of our staff to be on site for several days conducting desk audit interviews. So we did interact with about 150 different positions across the city as well. That allows us, again, to take good notes when we go to update job descriptions as well as make those external market comparisons. We do have a few title modifications proposed here and there, really just kind of clean up so that when we look across a couple hundred job titles, making sure that we're as consistent and as intentional as we can be with career ladders, with job families, with promotional opportunities, as well as kind of looking citywide at how we define the different levels that we have across the organization. You'll recall when we visited last time that I was here, we talked mostly about defining the market. And that's a challenge, getting people, keeping people, losing people, recruiting, retaining, all of those things pour into that conversation we last had about defining the market. We landed on this list of 8 kind of core survey comparators. We also looked within Mojave County at Bullhead, Kingman, and the county for public safety. That was also kind of where we had left off in the conversation. So that has been incorporated and included so that we have an idea of where we stand. We'll talk about that in just one more slide. And then our last task really kind of leads down the path of the budget exercise. Almost all of our project work is on paper. And that meaning specifically, we're comparing job descriptions, we're comparing salary plans, we're designing new salary plans. The last 10%, it stops being just paper and really kind of starts being people. We have designed new pay ranges for each job and each job description. Then when we get people onto that plan, we'll talk about any potential fiscal impact that might be related to shifting to that. The big change we have an illustration of would be that we are moving to an open range salary plan for civilian positions. So no more steps like you currently have for most civilian positions. We're going to move to a open range scale with a minimum, a midpoint, a maximum. Allows flexibility for salary increases within that scale. We have placed all jobs onto a pay range using that market data that I mentioned that we've collected. High level, when we look at our survey work, about 70% of our jobs look pretty good compared to market. There are some, maybe if I use plus or minus 5% to define competitive, 30% of our jobs are 5% or more behind market. So about a third of the 160, 170 different jobs that we're able to get reliable survey data on. So kind of 2/3, 1/3, about 2/3 of our positions look pretty good. There's a few that are right on that border at maybe -3, -4%. So we need to incorporate that just as we move to this new salary structure. The second bullet point I think was really interesting. When we looked within Mojave County, specifically at police officer, we were a little bit low for entry rate of police officer, even up against Bullhead, Kingman, Mojave County, even though they were not necessarily part of our core 8 agencies. Historically, you've attempted to stay kind of in that leadership position around the county for public safety. And so we honor that when we have modeled updated pay grades for those positions, which we'll talk about in just a moment. We also looked at benefits. So similar to an audit, kind of have a lack of findings here, but we looked at some really big ticket items: pension, health insurance for employees and dependents, paid time off, certification pay opportunities, all in line, with market practices. So not a ton of findings there, an awful lot of data, kind of sitting behind this summary, if you were, for this morning. When we look at modeling this new pay structure for civilians, we're offering now an open range scale. The range width overall didn't really change, but we're not locked into those 3.5% steps. This creates some flexibility for administering salaries from minimum to maximum and not necessarily being locked into those 3.5% increments for civilian positions. We placed all jobs onto a pay range. There's actually 23, 24 some odd pay ranges that will be in use and in play, but recommending then a market appropriate pay range for each civilian position, as well as logical kind of internal alignment based on those work relationships, based on my opportunity to move maybe from worker to senior worker to lead to supervisor. So a structure like this allows us to be really intentional about the distance between each pay range and the placement of those career ladder opportunities within a structure such as this. When we do this, I did mention we've got a little bit of movement, right? We do have some positions that need to move closer to market in order for us to say that now all positions have a similar relationship to market. We have modeled everything to market average. As a result, we do have some civilians that fall below the minimums that are proposed for their position. There's just over 600K there. Some of that is vacant positions when we just compare minimum of current structure to minimum of new structure. So there may be some savings depending on when those vacancies are filled and recruited. Public safety, just over 500, about 550K to move those positions closer to market and get people onto that scale. As I look at the initial study implementation cost, we're just under 1.2 before we incorporate benefits and load rate. So I'll let budget staff kind of speak to that as far as how they tend to plug in and anticipate what that associated cost for benefits might be as we look to react to the study itself. But certainly that kind of points to a conclusion part here, and that is overall study cost about 1.2 plus benefits. And that's before we start talking about budgeting for 2026. So I'll defer to staff there just kind of as part of the budget process, but we would recommend then moving to this new plan and continue to provide both in 2026 and beyond ongoing salary adjustments within these scales. Might look like step adjustments for public safety, wage stabilization, and in-range salary growth for the civilians on an open range scale. Staff, Mr. City Manager, if you don't have anything else to add, I will pause there and allow time certainly for questions and comments. Thank you.